Alright YouTube, I mentioned this in the last video, but it needs its own video, honestly, to fully explain the stupidity I'm seeing here. Obama has claimed that I think it was a little bit of a reference to Clinton being a loser. I think he was going after her as much as Trump, but he claims that if he had been allowed to run, for a third term, that pesky Constitution there, that he would have beaten Donald Trump. I'm here to tell you there would have been a 0% chance the outcome would have been substantially different. The reason why Trump won is the Rust Belt. He flipped Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That gave him the election. Would Obama have been able to compete in at least two of those? No, Wisconsin and Michigan he probably would have lost by a larger margin. And he certainly wouldn't have stacked the vote in California and had a lead of 3 million in the nationwide popular vote. It would have been a hell of a lot closer on that end. He probably would have lost New Hampshire as well, because he's seen as ineffective on drug policy. The only state I can see Trump having flipped that Obama probably would have retained would be North Carolina, honestly. Maybe Florida, but it wouldn't have been enough to give him the election. He still would have lost. Again, because New Hampshire possibly would have flipped. You could have seen certainly Nevada or Colorado do the same thing. It would have been closer across the board, but Trump, I think, would have retained, at the very least, he would have retained Michigan and Wisconsin. That would kind of end it right there. The fact is that for the Rust Belt voters, the reason why it tipped in the red direction in favor of Trump is because of jobs, is because of money and taxation and things along those lines. Those states got alienated from current politics largely because of those issues. Because the recovery affected the coasts and left everything else behind. Now, some of those states were going to be red anyway, inarguably, like, Montana or the Dakotas or something like that. Some of those states that actually have done fairly well because of oil booming in their states. Places, again, like the Dakotas, something along those lines. Elsewhere, though, especially within the Rust Belt, that area of the nation has been degrading for several decades now, with no end in sight. They wanted to vote for someone who claimed, at least, that he understood that there was a problem, because Obama has never acknowledged it. As part of his propaganda on the population, and Clinton continued this, the general line of reasoning used by Obama, Clinton, people like them is, what problem? There's no problem. We're in a recovery. The recession's over. Everything's fine. That works on a nationwide level because a large proportion of the population of the United States does live in or near one of these blue centers that have recovered, that deal with world trade, that deal with commerce. And you don't really, you don't have coal mines in New York City. You don't have, iron ore mining in the middle of Los Angeles or something like that. Okay. That's just fine. Those areas are doing, relatively well compared to at the end of the Bush presidency, first couple of years of Obama. I'm sure that people there, if they think that the president is responsible for their miraculous, slow but miraculous recovery, I'm sure that they probably do approve of Obama, at least on the economic side of things. The other part, I think perhaps the big part in some of these states, is foreign policy related. It's not just the economics of the Rust Belt. Okay, the economic side gave Trump Michigan. It gave Trump Pennsylvania. It gave Trump Wisconsin. It certainly helped him grab Iowa. It helped him crack some of these blue counties and areas of upstate New York and so forth, Minnesota, drawing it very close there. That's helpful. But what about people in general scattered across the entire United States in both red and blue areas? What are they worried about? They're worried about ISIS. They're worried about the reemergent Cold War. Now, they see a candidate like Hillary Clinton, who blames Russia for all of her problems. Would Obama not have done the same thing? I think he would have. He was more than willing to go along with it, sort of in a half-assed way. Obama has tried to distance himself from someone who ran a disastrous and outdated campaign. He is younger and more social media in tune. But it's not clear that the sort of memetics that were used in Obama's first run, his first campaign, the sort of viral material that existed at that time, or even in 2012, vastly different from what exists now. The number of people online, the level of organization online. We've got as well, there is a slight advantage towards populism, nativism, nationalism, and conservatism in its various forms in Western elections now. Because for the first time, this wasn't prevalent in 2008, certainly. For the first time, most people in areas of the world like Eastern Europe, parts of South Asia, even parts of East Africa, certain enclaves in Latin America, are entering the internet. And they're holding discourse with people in the United States or Western Europe. And they can't understand multiculturalism. They've either had it before and it was forced on them, and they realize it's wrong, or they just don't comprehend why any group of people would endorse such a strange concept to begin with. So you have tens or hundreds of millions of people from all over Eastern Europe and South Asia and so forth. They're mystified at how the Western world could do this. If you use like revolver maps, I've been using that on various sites since, the late 2000s, almost a decade now. And I can tell you, there is an enormous difference, both on political and spiritual material, by the way. I've noticed both. There's a huge difference between the number of people tuning in from some of these marginally advancing, marginally industrialized zones of the world then and now. Before, it was almost completely empty. You were lucky to ever get somebody from India watching your material. Now it's everybody, millions and millions of people. And you'd be hard-pressed to find people in these zones of the world where nationalism is essentially considered normal. Whether it's ethnic or civic makes little difference. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody there suicidal enough about their culture to encourage its own destruction. And so Trump gained an advantage from that too. Why would Obama have been any different? He and Clinton are both figures of the establishment, specifically the Democratic side thereof. Why do you think I said that Trump had such an advantage? You think that all of the lay Republicans were clamoring around to nominate Jeb Bush, to nominate Little Marco or somebody like that? Ted Cruz? Ted Cruz is the only one who ever gained any substantial traction. He wasn't even eligible to run. It's like somebody's asked me a few days ago and sent me a message. Oh, what do you think are the odds that Cruz or Rubio will run again? For Rubio, yeah, he could potentially become a president down the line. He needs more experience. He certainly needs to get off the amphetamines. He's got, he's fairly well-spoken, apparently well-received. He's from a swing state. Yeah, he could do all right. Ted Cruz, he's from a deep red state, so no home state advantage in the voting. He's presumably not eligible under most understandings of the Constitution, the idea of a natural-born citizen. And he's cringeworthy. No, Ted Cruz will never be the president of the United States, even if he were deemed eligible by the Supreme Court. Rubio, yeah, maybe. Down the line, 20 years from now or something. It's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible for that to happen. Ted Cruz, it's presumably not. What I'll say is that Obama's nuts if he thinks seriously that he would have beaten Trump. He was outmaneuvered too. The entire Democratic Party was. The DNC was in disarray for most of this election. All of Clinton's staffers were in disarray. The fact that people probably wouldn't have been able to leak a bunch of Obama-related material wouldn't have helped with the DNC. It wouldn't have helped with the DCCC stuff. It wouldn't have taken mass surveillance or ISIS off the table as far as issues. And it would have magnified the economic side because Obama's actually been in office. Clinton, despite being closely tied with Obama on the diplomatic end as a former Secretary of State, so she sort of owns the ISIS crap, especially in Libya. Obama's the one that was actually making the fiscal decisions at the executive level. So the economic problems within the Rust Belt and some of these other marginal areas, which were already pronounced, already a big factor in his victory there, would have been magnified because the person running would have been the one previously running the show and not helping these regions of the country. With Clinton, that wasn't particularly an issue. She had only been in a foreign policy position, Secretary of State. She was dealing with, we saw he died and stuff like that, but she didn't have any sway over, I think I'm going to modify this tax to try to help the Rust Belt. Oh, it didn't work. Well, I guess that plan's shot to hell. She had nothing to do with that. If Obama had run, he probably would have done better in Michigan. He probably would have done better in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania would have been in play, perhaps. he probably would have cracked New Hampshire. He probably would have done better in Maine. Maine and New Hampshire, that's mainly the drug war end, beyond anything else. He probably would have grabbed Virginia. And he might have jettisoned Florida in return, but he still would have won the election under almost any map you can draw up that would be sane, adjusting for the differences between, 50-something Obama and 70-year-old Hillary Clinton. Two neoliberals of very slightly different shades. Under any sensible and sane map you can draw up, Trump still would have beaten Obama. So I think he might be doing this just to save face. At this point, because his legacy's been destroyed as far as with centrists, as far as with even business Democrats, he has to now do the pity me thing and say, oh, well, I was a great man, I was a wonderful president, feel sorry for me, so that the left will keep loving him. He has to go sour grapes mode to salvage some sort of legacy. It'll be like Jimmy Carter. The left looks back at Jimmy Carter, who was remembered for 2 decades as a complete disaster. Now, I give him a pass on something. Some of it wasn't his fault. I will admit that. We have to be fair to Jimmy Carter. He's more sane than Clinton or Obama, that's for sure. A lot less warmongering, let's face it. Maybe economically more closely allied with someone like Bernie Sanders. He wasn't responsible for it all. But they look back at Jimmy Carter, and they have this sort of hard-on for his era of policy making. Now, most people in the country, Jimmy Carter, they either don't know who it is. Sadly, people should know about that. It's a recent president. We're not talking about somebody from 200 years ago. Come on, learn a little bit of civic history. They either ignore the economic problems of the time, they have a hard-on for him, or they don't know who he is, and so they can't dislike him. That's the Kasich effect, by the way. Why do you think John Kasich in matchups against Hillary Clinton was doing well? And they said, oh, only Kasich can save us, we must vote for him. It's because nobody knew who he was. But they knew who Clinton was, and they didn't like her. And that's how we knew that there was going to be an anti-Clinton vote all the way through that would help Trump win. It's as simple as that. That's about all. Peace out.